What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Rad Chad Show. Hey, we have got an awesome jam-packed schedule for you today, and we're going to try to get it all done in 30 minutes or less. But before we dive into any of that, I want to give you guys a great opportunity to win some free board games. We're going to be giving away 5 board games. Those include King of Tokyo with the power-up expansion. We have got Pandemic: The Cure, Warhammer Quest, Carcassonne, and Codenames. And the way to get them is very easy. It should be no skin off your back. Basically how it's going to work is swing on over to the YouTube channel if you're not already there. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. I know a lot of people ask for it. I don't want you to do it unless you genuinely enjoy what you see. But we've got some great, hilarious videos that you should absolutely check out. And then obviously you got the podcast that we'll do weekly, among other things like reviews, tutorials, you name it, right? So if you enjoy all of that, click that subscribe button. And basically as a thank you for being an early adopter to the channel, I'm going to take, once we get to the first 100 subscribers, I'm going to randomly pick a person. I will reach out to you via messaging and I'll say, hey, which one of these 5 board games do you want? And it'll be your choice. And provided you're not out in the Bermuda Triangle or lost somewhere in time and space, as Cthulhu mythos would have it, and shipping's, outlandish or just doesn't exist, period. I will even pick up the shipping expenses, so it should be a great opportunity for, again, just me to say thank you and give you guys a free board game. So we're going to do that once we get to 100 subscribers, then we're going to do it again at 200, 300, 400, and finally 500 subscribers. So, hey, if you're within that first 100 subscriber window, you're going to have 5 opportunities at a free board game. And so really, again, I hope it's a great way to say thank you guys. But without further ado, let's get into podcast number 2. I'm very glad that you guys are here watching it with me. Today we're going to talk about a few things. The first of which is I want to talk about Legendary. In specific, I want to talk about Legendary and Alien game. I also want to very briefly talk about Legendary Marvel because I want to use it as a compare and contrast measure to talk more importantly about Batman and the DC licensing as it pertains to board games. And then the final thing that we'll leave off on is actually 2 final things. The first, I guess it would be the third segment, is I want to talk about, if we're going to talk about Batman and licensing, I want to talk about Fantasy Flight and their licensing, and then we'll wrap up at the very end with Kickstarter. So anyways, without further ado, let's cue the intro and get right to it. First thing that I want to talk about is Legendary and Alien deck building game. Now, in my previous podcast, if you haven't watched it already, I talked about how Omen: A Reign of War is my #1 favorite game of all time, and the only other game that would give it a run for its money would be Legendary and Alien deck building game. I've got it sitting here on my shelf for a reason. That's because I'm a diehard Alien fan, and I absolutely love this board game. It takes the license of Alien and perfectly implements it into a board game. But I want to give you guys a few examples and illustrate why exactly that's the case. Now, I love Legendary Marvel, but the base game of Legendary Marvel was fairly simplistic. It was a very easy game. It lacked artwork. It just had all the same image for one specific card. And so overall, I was ready to actually sell Legendary Marvel. Now, we'll talk more about that in just a second. But Legendary Alien, on the other hand, comes in there guns blazing. So first of all, it has got the most graphic, beautiful, awesome artwork you could possibly imagine. It perfectly conveys what it's like to be in an Alien movie through the images on the cards. Not only that, but each individual scenario, it walks you through the first 4 movies, Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, and Alien 4. And each scenario follows the general plot line in a sense. So it's got its own objective cards, it's got its own natural progression because each villain deck, as I'll call it, the aliens that come out of the hive in this game, you've got kind of like a tiered system where they get progressively harder. You go from objective 1 to objective 2 to objective 3. Each objective changes, and as it changes, it gets progressively harder. It's really got a very natural ebb and flow to the game that increases in tension and scale of difficulty, just like the movies go, right? Everything starts out fairly good and gets progressively worse as the movies go on. And so anyways, the best example that I can use is that in Legendary Marvel, the game was very easy. In Legendary, an alien deck building game, man, this thing will whip your butt, especially at the higher player counts. And so an example for that is where you tie in the mechanics of the game with the theme of the game are done perfectly in this game, and they tie in back to how difficult the game actually is. So a good example is you've got that Hive deck, and this is all your enemy cards. And as the game progresses, you're going to put those enemy cards face down into the complex. And so this sort of simulates this idea of the aliens hunting you down, right? They're up in the air ventilation system, or they're down beneath you in the tunnels, or they're hiding in your closet or underneath your bed, which I was always scared of when I was a little kid. And as they go through this complex, you can sense that they are hunting you down, but you have no idea where they are. So you have to go in there with that little scanner, right, that shows the blips on the radar. And you have to find the aliens and take them out before they can get after you and start clawing at your face. So it's sort of like in the movie Aliens, which would be the second movie, where there's a long tunnel, right? And they've kind of barricaded themselves and they're fortifying a position, and they've got turrets that are holding down. And all of a sudden, the aliens start breaking loose, right? And they're scurrying across the walls, they're scurrying across the ceiling, they're coming at them at a full-on assault. And here they are hunkered down, right? And so they've got to take out all these aliens. And you sort of get that sense in this game because there's a palpable threat. There's a palpable fear, not only of what am I going to uncover when I go and I scan these cards to find out what the enemy actually is, but if I don't take care of the threat while it's still in the complex, and they actually progress, in this case, down that tunnel in Aliens, right, and they break through my defenses, well, there is player elimination in this game. So if they're clawing at your face, right, they're shooting that second mouth in through your head, they're shooting their tail through your back and out your chest, well, you can die in this game. And it's really great how the mechanics of the game tie in back with the theme. And the final example that I want to give you, and again, this is all just demonstrating how it ratchets up that difficulty from Legendary Marvel to what is a very hard game in Legendary Alien. You've got, in all of the Alien movies, the egg, right? And there's one thing that I've learned. If you see an alien egg, I don't care if it is just a spider egg, any sort of nasty looking little egg, you either burn that thing with fire or you run in the opposite direction because it never works out for the guys in Alien. All right, so that being said, in the board game, when you see an alien, if you don't take that threat out immediately, and let's say, for example, an event pops up, all of a sudden you got a face hugger that latches onto your face, and you got to either rip that thing off by killing it on your turn, or the player next to you has to rip it off for you by the end of their turn. Otherwise, that alien impregnates you. And now you've got a chest burster sitting somewhere inside your chest, and it's growing, and it's feasting, and it's brewing, right? And so what you do is, if that face hugger impregnates you, well, now you're part of the tribe. Now you are one of the aliens, and they won't attack you. You are one of them, which is a great twist to it. The aliens no longer attack you when you're breeding one of their babies. So you take one of these chest burster cards and you put it in your discard pile, as is the case with most cards that you gain from playing a deck builder. So you put it in your discard pile and you're playing the game, and you're drawing cards from your deck, and sooner or later your deck runs out. So you have to take that discard pile and you have to shuffle it back up and you have to make a new deck. And so now you're fearful, right? Because you know that chest burster card is somewhere in there. And so you're drawing cards. And if you ever draw that chest burster, there it comes, right? It shoots on out. You're a goner, man. We're all gonna die, man. And you were that guy that died. And that chest burster is the way that it did it. And it's a great way to build tension, build immersion, and make you feel like you're actually in the game. And so really, the Alien Legendary game, I couldn't have been more hyped for this game. And so for it to live up to that hype and to live up to my expectations for this license really says a lot about the game. And the whole theme of this podcast will be how licenses are done right or not done right. And I think in the case of Legendary and Alien deck building game, if you are a fan of this franchise, you really owe it to yourself to play this game. I absolutely love it, and that is why it's number 2 on my top 10 favorite games of all time. It's kind of funny, actually, that I just did the whole Legendary Alien segment, and yet I didn't do it while sitting in front of my Space Hugs Alien poster, which I absolutely love. But anyways, let's move on. Legendary Marvel I just talked about a fair amount, but I didn't actually talk about why I like the game. In fact, I had a lot of bad things to say about it. The artwork in the base game was just okay. There was a lack of it per se. It was a very easy game. I didn't necessarily like the fact that it was semi-cooperative and that you could play for points. And it was just a relatively simplistic deck builder. So why in the world is Legendary Marvel also with Legendary Alien as one of my top 10 favorite games of all time? Well, the simple answer to that question is two things. First of all, it seems like Marvel Studios is just on a roll lately, and it's like every quarter they're pumping out a new blockbuster smash that I absolutely love. So if you want to get that Marvel fix in, you really have no better place to look other than Legendary Marvel. Now, sure, Dice Masters has done a great job with the Marvel license as well, but Legendary Marvel, with all of its million bajillion expansions, is really the go-to place for all things Marvel as far as board games are concerned. And I think the second thing is that the Dark City expansion would be my number 2 out of my top 10 best expansions, most revolutionary expansions of all time. Now, I don't want to call it necessarily revolutionary because I don't know if it didn't revolutionize the game. It just dramatically improved the game. It ratchets up the difficulty like you wouldn't believe. You've got masterminds in there like Apocalypse and villains like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse that will really whip your tail. It improved and added a lot of card text to the game. And by that I mean there were new keywords that were introduced that really built upon the mechanics of the game and made it more integral for you to actually not only coordinate with each other to figure out, okay, well, I'm going to start buying these cards and you buy those cards, and together that'll help us to beat the game, which in this case was a lot harder, also necessitating more cooperation. Those two things really helped a lot. It improved the artwork a ton. Now there was different artwork for each different type of card in the game, and it really just built upon what was an okay foundation and fleshed it out into something that was truly amazing. And then the snowball just started going down the hill, and as you amass more, or at least as I amassed more and more and more expansions, I just became more and more addicted to this game. And now it stands as one of our favorite games because we absolutely love all of the Marvel characters, and every single one of those Marvel characters and then some is included in Marvel Legendary at some point with all the expansions. And the amount of diversity that you have in this game between the different schemes, which can radically change each game, the different mastermind and villain and henchman combinations, all the different hero combinations, like when you start mixing and matching all these things, I think probably the amount of combinations that you could have is almost endless. I'm sure that there's a mathematical number that you could equate, but I don't think anybody could literally play every single combination out there in a lifespan. So you have an endless amount of legendary content in all of these boxes, and the game has just progressively gotten better and better and better as each expansion goes by. And so now my wife and I find it a great cooperative game that we both know and love and can get to the table on many occasions. And so when you go see the new blockbuster smash that Marvel Studios produces, like the most recent Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, there's no better place to get that itch fixed than Legendary Marvel. We watch the movie, we hit the table, and we have an absolute blast, which is why I love Legendary Marvel. And so the question becomes, we talk about all these licenses, and I think Legendary does a great job. Upper Deck does a great job with licenses. We've got obviously Alien, obviously Marvel. I think they did a great job with Firefly, other than maybe some spotty artwork. They did a great job with Predator, which you saw in my poster. I also love that. You've got the upcoming Buffy one, which who knows? We'll see if that's any good. So they've really been knocking it out of the ballpark. And I look at licenses, and my favorite superhero of all time is Batman. Absolutely love Batman. I love his graphic novels, love his movies, t-shirts. If it's anything Batman, I consume it, video games included. I'm very excited to go play the new Telltale series of Batman. The first one was phenomenal. But when it comes to board games, Batman just doesn't have it. And it almost seems like where the recent DC film woes have been paralleled with the same in board games. So we've had some okay games, right? You've had DC Deckbuilding game, which was okay. You even had I think it was by Cryptozoic, the Escape from Arkham game. There was the Gotham City, was it Heroes? I don't remember. It was basically Batman against a whole bunch of villains. And all of these games had more or less lukewarm reactions or reception, with maybe the exception of the DC deck building game, which would just be a click above a lukewarm reception. And so just like the movies, there hasn't been, other than maybe Wonder Woman, just that standout awesome DC movie as of late, kind of like back when Christopher Nolan had the film at his hands. The Dark Knight trilogy, especially the second movie, just blew everybody away. And we don't have that movie or that board game currently. And so what I'd like to hear from you guys is if you were to choose a publisher and a designer or a even genre of the game, like what sort of DC game would you like to have? For me, for example, I'd love to have a Batman game, obviously. I'd like it to be done by maybe Vlaada Chvátil, which will probably never happen. And I would like it to be published by Fantasy Flight Games. Because speaking of which, I'm going to go off camera for a second. Fantasy Flight Games. I had already done this segment and I decided I was going to re-record it. So I had bought one of their games. It was Runebound Unbreakable Bonds, and we'll talk about that here in a future segment. And so, of course, they give you this lovely little advertisement, and, just naturally, because I'm sort of a Fantasy Flight Games addict, I'm flipping through this thing, and I'm looking here, Star Wars Rebellion. Love it. Great game. Can't wait for the expansion. Go to the next one. Star Wars X-Wing. That's been a huge smash. Go to the next one. Star Wars Imperial Assault. It's like an expansion out every day for that game. That's been a smash. Star Wars Armada. That's been another huge hit. You've got games like A Game of Thrones. That's another series. The card game. You even have Game of Thrones 2nd Edition, which was a huge hit. You have got, let's see what else is in here. Oh, obviously The Lord of the Rings, which they're still pumping out expansions for. You've got Star Wars The Card Game, which I know has sort of died off, but was still pretty big when it came out. What I'm getting at here, and I'll talk about Doom as well. Doom, the recent Fantasy Flight game, was an awesome licensed hit from Fantasy Flight. These guys know how to make a licensed board game, and a lot of these games are in the top 10, top 50, top 100 BoardGameGeek games of all time. And when you have so many games, like, obviously I know that people will have a bias towards the license, kind of like I do with Alien, and people are going to have that for Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. But I think you can objectively say some of these games are extremely good games, even despite the theme. The theme just happens to make them a heck of a lot better. Fantasy Flight knows how to make a game, especially a game that has a loved license behind it. And I'd love to see somebody take that sort of time, care, effort, TLC, and put it towards DC. Because DC's got some huge heroes, right? You've got Batman and Superman, who are probably two, if not the biggest superhero names of all. They'd at least be in the top 5, right? Not to mention the rest of the Justice League. You've got Wonder Woman, obviously. You've got Aquaman, Flash. The list just goes on and on. I just played Injustice 2, the video game. Absolutely loved it. And it's like that entire roster is worthy of board game material. So I would absolutely love to see somebody take the DC licenses and run with it, kind of like Fantasy Flight has with Star Wars, among other of their licenses. And so I'd like to get, again, your take. What do you think of the current state of the DC license in board games, and where would you like to see it maybe go in the future? Let me know in the comments below. All right, last but not least, I would like to wrap up by talking about Kickstarter, which can be a hot button topic and also a bit of a controversial topic, which I don't want to stray too deep into the controversial issues, but I do want to get some thoughts on Kickstarter in general. And the reason for it is it feels like we're in a renaissance period right now, which is a great thing. So Kickstarter has really given people the means to go out there and fund what has otherwise been I don't want to say not commercially successful market, because obviously there is a market out there and it is very viable, but it hasn't been commercially successful in the sense that something like Monopoly or Sorry or Risk and those games have been when they're on every single Walmart shelf out there. And sure, we've got some games like Settlers and Pandemic and maybe even Ticket to Ride who have sort of made it into that scale. But for the most part, we're almost like this little underground hobby. It's like the little hidden secret that nobody knows about. It's that hidden gem. And it's a great, beautiful thing. But I think Kickstarter is really bringing everything into the limelight. And we've almost got an oversaturation of board games right now, which can be a bit of a blessing and a curse. I think more so a blessing in the sense that you have so much healthy competition out there right now that you really have to be on your A game in order for a gamer like myself to actually pay attention and want to support your product by buying it. And that's a good thing, because then we're getting the best crop of of board games available to us because everybody's on their A game. So that's a beautiful thing about Kickstarter, is that it's bringing us into that Renaissance era of board games where we really have a surplus of games that we actually have. Now, on the flip side of that is Kickstarter as a means itself is I don't know, it's almost anti-consumer in a sense. Like, I think the way that it was originally pitched was that you would be out there supporting the small little independent guy, right? And so I'll always use the example of John Cloudis at Small Box Games. He's the creator of my favorite game, Omen: A Reign of War. He really is more or less a one-man show. So if you look at like sort of the credit section on the back of his rule books, it's like designer, John Cloudis, rulebook maker, John Cloudis, publisher, John Cloudis, this, John Cloudis, that, John Cloudis. It's like he did everything except for the artwork. Well, that's really cool. And so I naturally want to help support you because, you know, that's sort of what I envision Kickstarter being in the first place. Now, not to take huge knocks at Cool Mini or Not or Queen Games or some of these other, I don't know, just bigger publishers that we all associate as, in some senses, starting to become like Cool Mini or Not, almost as big as somebody like a Fantasy Flight. I mean, they're really hitting it big time. But what I want to get at is a lot of those guys seem to almost be abusing Kickstarter. And I'm not one who will back a lot of Kickstarters, but on a couple occasions I have backed a Cool Mini or Not Kickstarter, and I'll just use them as one example. They make great games, and I don't deny that in any way, shape, or form. I just have had a salty taste left in my own personal experiences because I kickstarted Xenoshift Dreadmire. And again, we'll talk about why this is a blessing and a curse. The curse portion of it is, when you go out there and you shell out a lot of capital for a board game, for example, I don't remember what I paid for Xenoshift, but in the case of First Martians, which I talked about in the previous episode, I didn't enjoy it. It cost me $75 for the base game. Then I paid $10 for shipping and handling, so I paid $85. Now, that was a pre-order. It wasn't a Kickstarter, but it's a very similar concept. In the case of Kickstarters, you're shelling out a lot of capital, $85. That's a big investment to make in something that you have no certainty over, you know, whether or not the final production will meet your standards, whether or not you'll actually like the game. You know, you'll wait somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, maybe even longer in some cases, and then you might find out that your interest in that game no longer exists, your financial capabilities aren't quite what they were, so maybe you want that money back. Like, there's a lot of risk associated, and I think for a lot of responsible people, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, for me personally, I just tend to, you know, keep a very wary eye on where I back Kickstarter games, and I don't do it very frequently, and the ones that I do it for, I'm very confident in. Obviously, I can still get burned like I did with First Martians and not enjoy the game, but at the end of the day, those are fairly rare, and I just move on. But those are a lot of the risks that you take. And I think my biggest problem with like a Cool Mini for Not or Not example was that I got Xenoshift Dreadmire and then not but like a few weeks, month, maybe later, you find that the game is offered at Cool Stuff Inc. or Miniature Market or Card House, like any of these online retailers. Amazon is another example, at a price that was, I don't know, I think $20, maybe even $25 less expensive than what I bought it for as just a base game on the Kickstarter. So I guess what I've always felt is that with Kickstarter, you are buying direct from the, in this case, manufacturer, more or less, right? The designer in this case, because you're not going to go buy from some manufacturer in China. They didn't make the game. That's not going to happen. But what I'm getting at is you're buying direct from the manufacturer. And I work in a sales-oriented role, so I understand the process of sales fairly well. And essentially, you know, you are going straight from manufacturer to consumer, and you're cutting out the steps between the manufacturer and the distributor and the wholesaler, which would be like your retail, your friendly local game store, your online local game store, and then their markup to you. So you're skipping basically two pretty big profit margins in between. And yet in a lot of Kickstarter cases, there's not that huge cost savings, right? I always love it when a Kickstarter says, you know, hey, the retail price is going to be, I'm just going to make up a simple number, $100. But as a thank you for backing us, we're going to give you a cost of $60, right? And in some cases, they'll even tell you, hey, our manufacturing costs are $40, but we're going to sell it to you for $60, and that's what we need to be profitable. I appreciate and I really value that, but I don't expect that out of everybody. And I'm not necessarily even saying that I expect expect a discount when compared to online game stores. It just can sometimes leave a bit of a salty taste in your mouth when you get the game and then a month later it's $20, $25 less, it's 25, sometimes even 50% less expensive at the online game store. Now, you can recoup a lot of your money, and this is the blessing side of it, because a lot of times you will get Kickstarter exclusives, and that's probably that one big asterisk that everybody is already saying in their head before I even got there. They're automatically thinking, well, Chad, Rad Chad, talk about Kickstarter exclusives, man. Totally understand. For me personally, Kickstarter exclusives more often than not are not worth the price of admission. Just again, for me personally, it's like a few extra little bonuses. But in some cases, like Xenoshift Dreadmire, for example, I mean, that was almost like a full-blown expansion that they had put in that box. And so it gave me the ability to resell the game. I think I sold it back for basically the same price, or very, very close to what I had bought the Kickstarter for, because, again, here's the curse. If you don't get in on that Kickstarter from the get-go, right? If you miss the window to get in on the Kickstarter, well, now you're crap out of luck, right? You don't have access to those exclusives. And so that can be a little unfortunate if you just happen to miss out for whatever reason. But again, if you go to resell your game because you didn't enjoy it for some reason, well, hey, you can recoup some of your money back. So I guess what I'm getting at in general is that Kickstarter is somewhere like there's a lot of black, there's a lot of white, there's a lot of good and bad, and we find ourselves in a gray area in between. I love the fact that there's so many games being published. I don't necessarily like the fact that I don't feel like I'm getting any sort of cost savings by buying directly from the manufacturer. And I also feel like, hey, I'm putting out this big old investment, both in time and money into your project, and it's going to take a long time for that to happen. And so I want something more back out of it. And sometimes Kickstarter exclusives can deliver that. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they increase the value of your games. Sometimes they're more or less meaningless and don't. Sometimes you miss out on Kickstarters, and sometimes you got a good deal. So anyways, I'd be curious on what you guys have to say about Kickstarter. Those are just my thoughts in general. And again, I'm not like overly disappointed with Kickstarter. I'm very conscientious about how I use it, and I think that we've got some areas in which we can improve Kickstarter, and I think the best thing would be is just for people to be more cognizant of how they're actually using it. And I think a lot of people are getting that way because they've been burned by certain campaigns, and now we're all getting smarter about how we use Kickstarter, and so who knows, it might become an even better thing moving forward in the future, and that's really what I would hope. So let me know what you guys think of Kickstarter. But to wrap all this up with a pretty bow, I want to thank you guys again for watching the second ever The Rad Chad Show podcast. Go ahead and click that subscribe button if you enjoyed what you saw. Go check out the funny videos. I think they're really great, and if you don't get a little chuckle out of those, then you might be a stone. You might not have personality, or maybe I'm just not funny. One of those two is the case. But hey, if you do click the subscribe button, we've got 5 board games we're going to give away. We've got King of Tokyo, including the Power Up expansion. We've got Pandemic the Cure, Warhammer Quest, Codenames, and Carcassonne. And basically the way that it's going to work is once we get to 100 subscribers, I will randomly choose one of those 100 subscribers. I'll reach out to you, ask you which game you want, send it to you, shipping included, so don't even worry about that, as just a thank you for being one of the first people to subscribe to the channel. And then we'll do it again at 200, 300, 400, and 500 subscribers. So it should be a great way, again, to say thank you guys for watching. So thank you for watching the second ever episode, and here is the outro.
Thank you for watching The Rad Chad Show. Till next time.